I'm sorry, Mrs. Fairmont, but there must be some mistake. This property was recently appraised at $8 million. Surely you mean to purchase it, not foreclose on it. The lawyer's words hung in the air as my former mother-in-law's face drained of color. That moment, watching Constance Fairmont realize that the daughter-in-law she'd spent 5 years tormenting now owned everything she'd once ruled, remains the sweetest silence I've ever heard. You know what they say about karma. Some people believe it takes lifetimes to come around. Others say it moves at exactly the speed it needs to. I used to wonder which was true. Then I learned that sometimes karma doesn't just come around. It gets buried under floorboards for safekeeping, waiting for the exact right moment to destroy the people who deserve it most. Hey, everyone. I hope you're doing well, wherever you're watching this from. Whether you're listening while you work, while you drive, or just trying to get through another day, I'm glad you're here. The weather's changing where I am, that weird in-between season where you don't know if you need a jacket or not. Feels fitting, honestly. This whole story is about those in-between spaces, the places people don't think to look. My name is Imani Clark Fairmont. Well, it's just Clark again now, but we'll get to that. This is the story of how I went from being the grieving widow everyone pitied, then mocked, then forgot, to the woman who bought their world out from under them. This is about the cottage they thought was a joke, the fortune they didn't know existed, and the husband who loved me enough to make sure the truth would eventually bury them all. If you stick with me through this, I promise you'll see the exact moment a family of old money wolves realized they'd been outsmarted by the quiet black woman they never bothered to take seriously. You'll hear how the mansion they fought over became their prison, while the worthless cottage they laughed about held more wealth than they'd see in 3 generations. And you'll understand why, when they came crawling back, I smiled the same polite smile I'd given them at every family dinner where they'd made me feel small. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we go any further, do me a favor. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been in a room where people talked over you like you weren't there, if you've ever been judged for who you loved or where you came from, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who turned their pain into power. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this story is for everyone who's ever been counted out. Let me start from the beginning. I was 24 when I met Harrison Fairmont, and I genuinely believed that love could bridge any gap. I believed that if 2 people cared about each other enough, things like race and class and family expectations would just fade into the background. I believed that kindness won people over, that respect was earned through patience, and that his family would eventually see what he saw in me. I was 24, working 2 jobs to finish my nursing degree, and I thought the way Harrison looked at me across the hospital corridor, I was doing clinical rotations, he was there visiting a friend, was the beginning of something beautiful. I thought his nervousness when he introduced me to his family was just normal new relationship jitters. I thought his mother's tight smile and careful questions about my background were her way of getting to know me. I believed in fairy tales where love conquered all. God, I was so young. Harrison was different from anyone I'd ever dated. Thoughtful. A little awkward, if I'm honest, but in an endearing way. He'd grown up in the Fairmont Mansion on Sterling Hill, the kind of place that had a name and a Wikipedia page. Old tobacco money, then textiles, then real estate. The kind of wealth where you don't talk about money because it's simply always there, like air. We dated for 8 months before he proposed. Small ceremony, his family made it very clear they wouldn't contribute to anything extravagant since, as his mother Constance put it, we hardly know the girl, Harrison. What's the rush? But we did it anyway. Courthouse wedding, dinner with my family afterward, and Harrison's sister Victoria showed up for exactly 45 minutes, checked her phone the entire time, and left without saying goodbye to me. I told myself it would get better. The first 2 years were us against the world. We lived in a modest house in town, nowhere near the estate. Harrison worked for the family business, but kept our life separate. He was protecting me, I realize now. Keeping me away from the poison, as long as he could. Then Grace was born. My daughter came into this world with her father's gray eyes and my mother's stubborn chin, and she was perfect. Harrison cried when he held her. Actually cried. He whispered promises to her about the life she'd have, the future he'd build for her, how she'd never want for anything. I should have noticed how specific those promises were. I should have wondered why he started spending more time in his study, why he took phone calls in the next room, why he started asking me strange questions about what I'd do if something ever happened to him. But I was exhausted. New mother, working part-time, trying to manage the increasing pressure from his family to bring the baby to the estate, and let us get to know our granddaughter. Every visit to that mansion felt like a performance review. I was failing. Constance would inspect Grace's clothes. Victoria would make comments about exotic features that made my skin crawl. Harrison's brother Preston mostly ignored us both, except to occasionally ask Harrison when he was going to get serious about the family business. I was 27 years old, holding my daughter in a house that felt like a museum, smiling through microaggressions I couldn't quite name, and believing that patience and dignity would eventually win the day. Then Harrison collapsed in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. Brain aneurysm. Sudden. Catastrophic. He was 32 years old. He was alive when they called me barely. I made it to the hospital, the same hospital where we'd met, which felt like the universe's idea of a sick joke, and held his hand for 17 minutes before he died. He couldn't speak, could barely move, but he squeezed my hand in this desperate, urgent way, and his eyes were trying to tell me something. I thought he was saying goodbye. I didn't realize he was saying, "Trust me. It's going to be okay." I made sure. Trust me. The funeral was enormous. The Fairmonts knew how to put on a show. Constance wore black Chanel and wept elegantly into a handkerchief. Victoria gave a eulogy about our beloved Harrison that barely mentioned me and didn't mention Grace at all. Preston looked bored. I sat in the front row in a dress from Target, holding my 2-year-old daughter, and felt utterly alone. The will reading was scheduled for 1 week later. I need to back up and tell you who I actually was before all this, because it matters. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and my grandmother. Dad left when I was 3, and honestly, I barely remember him. Mom worked at the post office for 30 years. Grandma cleaned houses until her knees gave out. We weren't poor, but we were careful. Every dollar had a job. I learned to budget before I learned to drive. But our house was full of love. Real love, the kind where people show up for each other. When I decided to go to nursing school, Mom picked up overtime. Grandma insisted I take her savings. I worked nights at a grocery store and weekends at a clinic doing administrative work. I was tired all the time, but I was building something. The day I met Harrison, I was running on 4 hours of sleep and my 3rd coffee. I'd just finished a brutal rotation in the ICU, and I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria staring at a salad I was too exhausted to eat. This tall, white guy in expensive casual clothes, the kind that looks simple but cost more than my rent, sat down across from me. "You look like you've had the day I'm having," he said. I looked up, ready to give a polite smile and go back to my salad, but something about his face stopped me. He looked genuinely sad. Not hospital visit sad, but something deeper. Lost, maybe. "Friend of yours upstairs?" I asked. "College roommate.
Motorcycle accident."
"He's going to be okay, but..." Harrison trailed off, ran his hand through his hair. Makes you think about how fast things can change. We talked for 40 minutes. He never asked what I did, just assumed I was a doctor, which was funny and a little telling. When I corrected him, explained I was still in school, he didn't do that thing some people do, where their interest visibly dims. He just asked what kind of nursing I wanted to do. I told him about wanting to work in community health, bringing care to underserved neighborhoods. He listened like every word mattered. When he asked for my number, I hesitated. This white man in his designer clothes who clearly came from money, interested in me? I'd been down that road before. Guys who thought dating a black woman was adventurous or rebellious or a way to piss off their parents. I wasn't interested in being someone's experiment. But Harrison seemed different. So I gave him my number. Our first date was coffee. Our second was a walk through the botanical gardens. Our third was dinner at this tiny Ethiopian restaurant I loved, and he admitted he'd never had Ethiopian food but spent 2 hours the night before researching it, so he wouldn't seem ignorant. That's when I started falling for him. He told me about his family on our fifth date. We were at his place, a nice condo, tastefully decorated, the kind of space that came with heating that actually worked and water pressure that didn't quit halfway through a shower. We just finished watching a movie, and I'd made some joke about him being a trust fund kid. His face got serious. I need to tell you about my family. That's when I learned about the Fairmonts, the estate, the business, the expectations. He explained it like it was a burden, which I didn't fully understand at the time. How could having everything be heavy? They're going to have opinions about you, he said carefully. About us. Opinions about me being black, I clarified. I needed him to say it. Yes. He didn't flinch, didn't sugarcoat. My mother is complicated. She cares a lot about appearances, about the family name, about tradition. Victoria is easier, but she follows mother's lead. Preston is in his own world most of the time. And you? I asked. What do you care about? He took my hand. I care about finding someone real. Someone who sees me as Harrison, not as a Fairmont. Someone who talks to me about things that actually matter, not stock portfolios and social calendars. I care about you. I wanted to believe him so badly. And honestly, most of me did. Meeting his family was worse than I expected, and I'd expected it to be bad. Constance Fairmont was 61 years old and looked like she'd been carved from ice and expensive moisturizer. She didn't hug me when Harrison introduced us. She extended her hand for a brief, limp handshake and said, "How lovely to meet you. Harrison's told us so little about you." The emphasis on little was deliberate. Victoria was 35, divorced and bitter about it. She looked me up and down like I was a knockoff handbag she was trying to authenticate. "Nursing," she said when Harrison mentioned my school. "How noble. We certainly need more healthcare workers." The way she said healthcare workers made it sound like something you'd scrape off your shoe. Preston was the oldest at 38, already balding, already looking like he was practicing to be his father. Their dad had died 10 years earlier, which made Constance the matriarch and Preston the de facto head of the family. He barely acknowledged me beyond a nod. Dinner was 2 hours of barely concealed hostility dressed up as polite conversation. Constance asked where I summered and seemed baffled when I didn't understand the question. Victoria wanted to know about my family's lineage, which was a wild way to ask about my background. Preston ignored everyone and checked his phone. Harrison held my hand under the table the entire time. In the car afterward, I cried. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears of humiliation and anger. "I'm sorry," Harrison said. "I'm so sorry. They'll come around. They just need time." "Your mother asked me if I knew which fork to use for fish," I said. "There were 4 forks, Harrison." "4. Who needs 4 forks?" I know. But Imani, listen to me." He pulled over, turned to face me. "I love you. Not my family. Not their approval. Not their money. You. If you can handle this, if you can give it time, I promise I'll spend my life making sure you never regret it." I wiped my eyes. This is crazy. We've only been dating 4 months. I know. But I also know I want to marry you. I know I want to build a life that's nothing like the one I grew up in. I know that when I'm with you, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in 30 years. He proposed 3 months later. His family's reaction was about what you'd expect. Constance called it sudden and suggested we wait. Victoria said, "Are you sure, Harrison? You barely know her." Preston asked if I'd signed a prenup yet, which was the first time anyone had mentioned one. "There won't be a prenup," Harrison said firmly. We were back at the estate for Sunday dinner, which had become a monthly obligation I dreaded. Imani isn't marrying me for money. Of course not, dear, Constance said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But these things are standard in families like ours. It protects everyone. I don't need protecting from my wife, Harrison said. The table went quiet. I focused on my plate, feeling like I was watching someone defend me in a language I only partially understood. We got married without their blessing or their money. My mom and grandma threw us a reception at my aunt's house. Harrison's family sent a card. For 2 years, we built our own life. Harrison worked for the family business, but kept boundaries. We lived modestly by his family's standards, comfortably by mine. He never made me feel small about my student loans or my budget grocery shopping or the fact that I clipped coupons. Then, I got pregnant. Harrison was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. He started having panic attacks in the middle of the night, gasping awake with this look of absolute fear. What if I mess this up, he'd say. What if I turn into them? You won't, I'd promise. You're nothing like them, but the pregnancy changed something.
His family suddenly wanted to be involved.
Constance started calling, insisting on throwing me a baby shower. Victoria wanted to help decorate the nursery. Preston even showed up at our house once with a ridiculously expensive stroller. They're trying, Harrison said hopefully. Maybe the baby is what we needed. A new generation. A fresh start. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe that Grace would be the bridge that finally connected me to this family. The baby shower was at the estate. Constance invited her entire social circle, women I'd never met who air-kissed my cheeks and asked invasive questions about my pregnancy, while sipping champagne I couldn't drink. They cooed over expensive gifts I didn't register for and gave advice I didn't ask for. One of Constance's friends, a woman dripping in diamonds and judgment, actually touched my stomach without asking and said, "Well, the baby will certainly have an interesting look." Mixed babies are so exotic. I felt Harrison tense beside me. Before he could say anything, I smiled and said, "Yes, she'll be beautiful, just like her father." The woman's smile froze. Constance swooped in with more small talk, but I caught her expression. She was embarrassed. Not of her friend.
Of me.
For creating an uncomfortable moment in her home. That's when I started to understand that I would never be family to these people. I would always be the outsider who trapped their Harrison. Grace was born on a Wednesday morning in April. 7 pounds, 3 ounces.
Perfect.
Harrison held her and wept, and I watched this man who'd been having panic attacks for months completely melt into instant, devoted fatherhood. "I'm going to give her everything," he whispered. "Everything I didn't have. Real love, real family, security that no one can touch." It was a strange thing to say, but I was high on epidural and exhaustion and oxytocin, so I just kissed him and said, "We both will." His family visited the hospital. Constance held Grace for exactly 90 seconds, said she was darling, and handed her back. Victoria took one photo for social media and left. Preston didn't come at all. My mom and grandma practically moved into our house for the first month. They cooked, they cleaned, they held Grace when I needed to sleep. That's when the contrast became impossible to ignore. Harrison saw it too. His family had money. Mine had love. And for the first time, I think he realized which one actually mattered. He started acting strange about 6 months after Grace was born. Secretive. He'd take calls in another room. He spent hours in his study with the door locked. He started asking me weird, hypothetical questions. "If something happened to me, what would you do?" "Nothing's going to happen to you," I'd say. "But if it did, would you go back to school? Would you stay here or move closer to your mom?" "Harrison, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" "Nothing. Just thinking about the future. About making sure you and Grace are protected." He met with lawyers. Updated his will. Started organizing his documents. When I asked about it, he said he was just getting things in order now that we had a daughter. I thought he was being responsible. I didn't know he was preparing for the war that would come after his death. Grace was 2 years and 3 months old when Harrison died. We were supposed to have breakfast together that morning, but he got called into the office early. Something about Preston messing up a contract negotiation. Harrison kissed Grace's forehead, kissed my lips, and said, "I love you both more than anything in this world. Remember that." "I love you too. See you tonight." See you tonight. Except I didn't. The call came at 2:47 p.m. Harrison had collapsed during a meeting. They were taking him to Memorial General. I needed to come now. I grabbed Grace, called my mom sobbing, and drove 90 miles an hour to the same hospital where we'd met. The same hallways where we'd had our first conversation. The same cafeteria where he'd sat down across from me and changed my entire life. They let me into his room. He was unconscious, machines breathing for him, but his vitals were failing. The doctor used words like catastrophic and unsurvivable, and making him comfortable. I held his hand. Grace was with my mom in the waiting room. I couldn't let her see him like this. I whispered everything I wished I'd said that morning. How much I loved him. How good he'd been to me. How sorry I was that his family had never appreciated the kind, thoughtful man he was. His hand twitched. His eyes opened just a fraction. He couldn't speak. The intubation prevented that, but his eyes locked on mine with this desperate intensity. He squeezed my hand 3 times.
Hard.
I squeezed back. "I'm here. I'm right here. Grace is safe. We're okay." His eyes were trying to tell me something. Something urgent. But I didn't understand. I thought he was just scared.
I thought he was saying goodbye.
He died 17 minutes later. The funeral was a circus. The Fairmonts treated it like a social event. Constance held court like a tragic queen. Victoria posted black and white photos on social media with captions about loss and legacy. Preston gave a speech about Harrison's dedication to the family business that made it sound like they'd been close, which was a lie. I sat there in my Target dress, holding my daughter, who kept asking where Daddy was, and felt like I was watching strangers bury someone they'd never actually known. The only real moment came from my mom. She stood up during the open mic portion, walked to the front in her Sunday best, and said, "Harrison was a good man who loved his family.
His real family.
The one he chose. And we will make sure his daughter knows what kind of father she had." Constance's face went tight. Victoria whispered something to Preston. But my mom didn't care. She'd said what needed saying. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I didn't want to go. I told the lawyer I didn't need to be there, that whatever Harrison left could just be sent to me. But the lawyer insisted. "Mrs. Fairmont, your presence is required. It's specified in the will." So I went. I walked into that law office with Grace on my hip, wearing the only black dress I owned that still fit, and sat down across from Constance, Victoria, and Preston. They barely looked at me. The lawyer, a man named Gerald Hutchins who'd known the family for decades, opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. "This is the last will and testament of Harrison Nathaniel Fairmont," he began. I half listened as he read through the formalities. Legal language that sounded like another language. Then he got to the specific bequests. "To my mother, Constance Fairmont, I leave the Fairmont estate mansion and all its contents." Constance nodded like a queen accepting her due. "To my sister, Victoria Fairmont Sterling, I leave the collection of luxury vehicles and the beach property in South Carolina."
Victoria smiled.
Actually smiled. "To my brother, Preston Fairmont, I leave controlling interest in Fairmont Industries and all associated business holdings." Preston leaned back, satisfied. Then the lawyer looked at me. His expression shifted to something that might have been pity. "And to my wife, Imani Clark Fairmont, and our daughter Grace, I leave the cottage property at the edge of the estate, located at 1440 Sterling Hill Road." The room went silent. Then Victoria laughed. Actually laughed. "The cottage," she said. "He left them the old cottage?" Preston shook his head. "That place has been condemned for years. The roof leaks. The foundation is cracked." Constance didn't laugh. She just looked at me with something cold and victorious in her eyes.
Well,
I suppose Harrison knew what was appropriate. I felt like I'd been slapped. My husband, the man I'd loved, who'd promised to give our daughter everything, had left his family the mansion, the cars, the business, and given me and Grace a condemned cottage. The lawyer cleared his throat. "There's a note attached to this bequest. Harrison left specific instructions that the cottage is not to be sold, demolished, or altered. Mrs. Fairmont has full ownership with no restrictions, but she must keep the property intact." "How generous," Victoria said, dripping sarcasm. "She gets to keep the shack." I stood up. My hands were shaking. Grace was getting fussy, sensing my distress. "Is that everything?" I asked the lawyer. "There are some minor financial accounts, but yes, that's the primary distribution of assets." I walked out. I made it to my car before I started crying. Deep, gasping sobs that scared Grace, which made me cry harder because I was scaring my daughter and I couldn't stop. Harrison had left me nothing. After all his promises, all his talk about protecting us and making sure Grace had everything, he'd given his family the fortune and given me a rotting cottage I couldn't even sell. I drove to my mom's house and told her everything. She held me while I cried, then pulled back and looked me in the eye. "Baby, listen to me. Harrison loved you. I saw it every time he looked at you. There's something we're missing here. That man wouldn't do this to you and Grace without a reason." "What reason, Mom? What possible reason?" "I don't know, but you need to go see that cottage. You need to see what he left you before you decide what it means." I didn't want to. I wanted to forget the cottage existed. But my mom was right about one thing. I needed to see it. I needed to understand why my husband's final act had been to humiliate me in front of the family who'd never wanted me in the first place. 3 days later, I drove to 1440 Sterling Hill Road. The cottage sat at the farthest edge of the Fairmont estate, nearly hidden by overgrown trees and wild grass. It was small, maybe 900 square feet. The paint was peeling.
the porch sagged.
Several windows were cracked. It looked like a place where hope went to die. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at this place that was supposedly my inheritance, and felt rage building underneath the grief. Then I got out and walked up to the door. The key was under a flower pot that had long since shattered, leaving just dry dirt and ceramic shards. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Dust and mildew and abandonment. The interior was dim, even in daylight. There was old furniture covered in sheets. Water stains on the ceiling. Warped floorboards that creaked under my weight. This was what my husband thought I deserved. This was what 2 years of marriage and a daughter and all his promises of protection had amounted to. I walked through the small living room, the tiny kitchen, the single bedroom. Everything was falling apart. Everything was broken.
Just like me.
I stood in the center of the cottage, surrounded by decay and disappointment, and made a decision. If this was all I had, then I'd make it work. I'd rebuild this place for Grace. I'd show the Fairmonts that I didn't need their mansion or their money or their approval. I'd survive this, just like I'd survived everything else. I had no idea that beneath my feet, under those warped and creaking floorboards, was everything Harrison had actually meant to give me. I had no idea that the real will, the real inheritance, was about to reveal itself. And I had absolutely no idea that the family laughing at me from their mansion would soon be begging at my door. But I'd learn. God help me, I'd learn. Moving into the cottage wasn't a choice. It was survival. 2 weeks after the will reading, I got a letter from the estate management company. The house Harrison and I had rented was owned by the Fairmont Family Trust. I had 30 days to vacate. Constance's signature was at the bottom of the letter. My mom offered to let me and Grace move in with her, but her apartment was barely big enough for one person. My aunt had a spare room, but she lived 2 hours away, and I'd have to leave my job, my support system,